Hi, everyone. It's Monday, May 13th. You're watching CBC News BC. I'm Benny Brach here in the Vancouver newsroom, and here's what we're following this afternoon. Well, in a moment, the BC government is set to give an update on recruitment of American healthcare providers. You might recall how in the throne speech earlier this year, the government committed to attracting U.S. healthcare workers to fill in staffing gaps. This also comes as U.S. President Donald Trump makes changes to the American healthcare system and as political tensions rise. We've been hearing lots about British Columbians without a doctor, emergency room closures to staffing shortages. And Premier David Eby and Health Minister Josie Osborne, they will be sharing an update about the province's efforts to recruit nurses, doctors, and other healthcare professionals shortly. Also, a series of fires over the weekend have left dozens of BC residents out of their homes. One fire happened at Anmore and left 3 homes destroyed. It happened Saturday night at around 11:30. The Saskatchewan Fire Department says it took around 3 hours to get that blaze under control.
Heat was extremely intense. There was a lot of people out and about, a bit of chaos. Took a few minutes to get the scene settled down, but it was quite spectacular, the fire. Visibility was actually a problem for us at a few points. We couldn't actually see where the fire was. The smoke was so thick.
Officials say residents were evacuated safely. One woman was sent to hospital but has since been released. An investigation has gotten underway to look into what started that fire. Meanwhile, 36 people are still displaced after a massive fire in North Vancouver over the weekend. It's the second fire at the seniors complex in less than 3 years, and officials don't know what started that blaze. Photos and videos posted online show the building was engulfed in flames with thick black and gray smoke billowing overhead. Fire Chief Mike Dank says it took fire crews from all over the North Shore to get that fire under control. With BC's hottest and dry months just around the corner, FortisBC is proposing to proactively cut power to some customers in the southern interior. It says that this is a safety measure to protect communities and critical infrastructure against wildfires. Those outages could happen during extremely hot and dry conditions and last for 72 hours or more. FortisBC says this would be a last resort, but the mayor of Princeton has written an open letter to Fortis criticizing their plans.
To start off, we'd have to evacuate probably 1,000 people. We'd have to evacuate both hospitals, the one in Princeton and in Caribbean. We'd have to evacuate our care facilities. We'd have to evacuate anybody with high risk, so anybody who's got diabetes or CPAP and all those type of things, they'd all have to be evacuated. So it's a mass evacuation of the valley.
The mayor has filed a formal complaint with the BC Utilities Commission about those plans. And a BC ostrich farm is awaiting a court ruling this week on the fate of hundreds of birds on their farm. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency had ordered the ostriches to be culled because of concerns about avian flu. So for nearly 4 weeks, the Universal Ostrich Farm, they've been waiting for the federal court's decision. Avian flu was detected there more than 5 months ago, but the family says the birds are healthy and that they've developed herd immunity. A spokesperson for the farm says they're hopeful, after meeting with BC's agricultural minister, that there could be potential contribution to research and a way to save the birds. But they say the province has made no commitments. The decision is expected to come early this week. And those are your afternoon headlines. Stay with us. BC Today is up next. Thanks for joining us.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. The U.S. and China have agreed to roll back tariffs for 90 days and continue trade talks. What does that mean for Canada? And where does the trade war go from here? That's up first. At 12:15, from school to friends to social media, young people face more stress and anxiety these days. How can we better support their mental health? How do you approach mental health and talk about substance use with your child? We have a great panel of experts taking your calls this hour. I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Well, the U.S. has announced a rollback on Chinese tariffs for 90 days. President Donald Trump spoke earlier today from the White House, and he said the U.S. will temporarily lower tariffs on Chinese goods from 145% down to 30%. And China, meanwhile, will cut its tariffs on U.S. imports from 125% to just 10%.
We achieved a total reset with China after productive talks in Geneva. Both sides now agreed to reduce the tariffs imposed after April 2nd to 10% for 90 days as negotiators continue in the larger structural issues. The talks in Geneva were very friendly. The relationship is very good. We're not looking to hurt China. China was being hurt very badly. They were closing up factories. They were having a lot of unrest. And they were very happy to be able to do something with us. And the relationship is very, very good. I'll speak to President Xi maybe at the end of the week.
That's U.S. President Donald Trump at the White House this morning, announcing a reduction in tariffs on Chinese goods. Trump and U.K. Prime Minister Keir Starmer also announced a new agreement last week. So where does this all leave Canada in this trade war? Just a week after Prime Minister Mark Carney met with Donald Trump at the White House, Jovian Radheshwar is a political scientist at Douglas College and joins me now. Hello, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me back, Michelle.
Good to have you back. How did we go from all the bluster that we heard from the U.S. when it came to China to hearing from Donald Trump this morning calling it a very good relationship and that they didn't want to hurt China?
Well, it's clear that there's been a miscalculation by the Trump administration with regard to how much power they have in economic matters on a global scale. They've stepped back from these tariff threats that they've been, of course, levying for some time. We have the UK semi-deal or quasi-deal that was reached last week, and now a commitment to negotiate with China. This is something that suggests that the U.S.'s overall significance in global trading relationships is much lower than Trump previously had suggested. And this is, I think there's no other way of saying it. It is a capitulation.
How much of a factor do you think it has been, or it was, that with incoming tariffs, consumers pay more? So as Chinese goods that would continue to go into the U.S., would eventually face higher prices for local consumers there. Do you think that may have an impact?
Absolutely. These economies are interlinked with each other. The language from Secretary Bessent today was that they didn't want to necessarily have a forced decoupling of the economies. Markets, retail markets, consumer markets are all deeply interconnected. Just look at the drop shipping industry, for example, that has thrived on a de minimis exception for tariffs, which of course does not come back into force. There will still be tariffs on what was previously de minimis packages. So those will remain in place at 10% in the context of this new deal. So that hasn't been changed. But of course, more broadly, we have the situation with huge numbers of container ships being empty or not filling orders, and truckers potentially losing jobs here on the West Coast in California. They were talking about 200,000 truckers losing jobs in Los Angeles and Oakland in the last several weeks. So the trickle-down effects of this throughout the economy for both retail as well as consumer spending are just too massive for Trump to ignore. His popularity numbers have been going down, and in many ways the announcement of this Liberation Day trade war a few months ago is at the heart of his drop in popularity.
And can we talk about, I think you called it a semi-trade deal or sort of quasi-trade deal with the UK that was announced last week? According to Donald Trump, he called it a major trade deal. This is what he announced on social media. What exactly was agreed to there?
Essentially, the U.S. is going to be getting some preferential access to high technology UK exports, things that have to do with avionics and maybe military technologies, whereas the U.S. would be able to also get access to the UK's agricultural consumer markets for especially selling American beef. British beef was being allowed into the U.S. As a sort of reciprocity for that. But of course, UK farmers are very concerned about the quality of American beef and the fact that, of course, American farm products operate at an economy of scale compared to the much smaller production facilities in the UK, which means that they have a lower price point than a lot of UK products. So this is something that can be quite concerning for middle class people involved in that industry in the UK.
What does this all mean for Canada? We know that tomorrow we are expecting the new cabinet to be announced by Prime Minister Mark Carney. He's just coming off the heels of this meeting last week with Donald Trump. What does this all mean for the trade war that's happening between Canada and the U.S.?
I think it's not really good news because it suggests that the UK has allowed itself to be bullied, and China certainly has not allowed itself to be bullied. But if China is sort of cutting their losses and doing something pragmatic and strategic because they have a lot of power, we have to remember that Canada's, of course, not anywhere big in terms of economy as China. And the fact that the UK gave in with Keir Starmer not necessarily coming out strongly in favor of supporting Canada in the context of the threats that our country has faced since Trump has come into office, it suggests that Canada might be getting isolated a bit. And I'm personally worried about that. I'm especially worried about supply management in Canada. And that's also, of course, very politically sensitive to the new prime minister, the incoming prime minister, because of the fact that a lot of his votes came from Quebec, where supply management is, of course, a really, really big issue. And just yesterday, we saw 2 days ago that one of the seats was won by the Liberals by one vote. So he's going to really have to deliver on defending supply management in Quebec in order to keep his Liberal victory sustainable for the near future. And it's going to be really difficult for him to do that, given that the UK is also now liberalizing agricultural imports from the United States. So I look for the Trump administration to make a big push to get access to Canada's dairy sector now.
Now, I imagine the auto sector and here in BC, the forestry sector is going to be watching very closely.
Absolutely. The auto sector obviously is in duress. We've seen workers laid off or getting temporary layoffs back east. The lumber sector is obviously something that's central to Canada's economy, and it's something that the United States, the government there has been on record saying, oh, we don't need Canadian lumber. Of course, a lot of our lumber is sold to the United States. There's been a lot of talk of finding alternative markets. Of course, if we go and find those alternative markets, then that can also become a bit of a bargaining chip in different ways. In future trade negotiations, the Trump administration could say, oh, we want you to start selling back to us again. Or on the other hand, we could say to them, we have alternative markets, so we have our own leverage. So in terms of seeing how that plays out, it'll certainly affect it.
Jovian, as we wrap up here, I'm just wondering, for people who are confused right now, because there have been so many developments, there's this sort of fog of the trade war. Can you help give some clarity? Like, how do you describe this stage in U.S. relations with Canada and with other countries?
That's a great question. I think at the heart of all of this is it's important for listeners and viewers to review the Plaza Accords, which was an agreement that the Reagan administration was able to arm wrestle out of America's main partners back in the 1980s, which allowed for a de facto depreciation of the US dollar in a way that allowed for US exports to become somewhat more competitive with foreign imports into the United States and also in global markets more generally. So right now, I think what the administration is trying to do, especially with its relationship with China, is to negotiate space to make more market access for U.S. exports, and at the same time to make those exports more competitive. This also connects with monetary policy and who holds U.S. Treasury bills. Of course, China holds a large number of those Treasury bills, and that's an area that is a bit difficult to game out because we, of course, have countervailing interests. Sometimes it's important to hold Treasury bills in order to help stabilize your trade partners' economy and currency value. But if they upset you, then you can start selling those Treasury bills, but that can also have not necessarily the best effects on broader stability of trade. Recently, the Canadian government, the Japanese government, and behind the scenes also the German government have made statements or have intimated that they're willing to start selling off U.S. Treasury bills, and this is something that also exposes a structural weakness. So the question is, will Trump be able to get China, the Gulf countries, Japan, the European Union, Canada, the UK, to allow for the United States to make its exports more competitive in these different areas? And for Canada, since our economies are so connected, the US and Canada, this can also have a negative effect on the Canadian dollar, which could be good for our exports, but could also be bad for other aspects of our heavily investment-reliant economy, where the value of the Canadian dollar is the linchpin for things like real estate investment, for example, coming into this country.
Jovian, always good to speak with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Jovian Radheshwar is a political scientist at Douglas College. Now, one of the most prominent ripple effects of the trade war is the decline in travel to the U.S. New data from Statistics Canada shows a steep decline in return trips to the United States by Canadians. Compared to April of last year, return trips are down by more than 35% by car and down nearly 20% by air. Now, we talked about this last Friday. We talked about Canadian baseball fans apparently in short supply heading to Seattle over the weekend for that Blue Jays v. Mariners series of games. 3 games, which included a 9-1 win on Sunday. By the by, typically Canadian baseball fans, of course, flock south for that annual series. Here's CBC's Yasmin Ranea on one Vancouver couple who said that skipping that yearly tradition and staying home was to send a message.
Mother's Day game.
Yeah, we have been for Mother's Day.
Longtime Blue Jays fans Emily Peden and Connor Newcomb watching Sunday's game from their living room to send a message.
I don't necessarily think I want to support a place, just any place in particular, that thinks that I shouldn't exist as we do today.
The Vancouver couple ending their annual tradition of traveling to Seattle to watch the Jays take on the Mariners because of Donald Trump's tariffs and his talk of annexing Canada. This local baseball coach also skipping the games this year.
It's just become a little less about the baseball and more about the politics.
And he hits this one to deep right field. It's gone.
About 4,000 fewer people attended the Jays-Mariners showdown this year compared to last year, according to ESPN.
Well, you know what a Tuesday night is.
The Jays' visit comes as the team is off to a slow start, but that shouldn't affect attendance, says one baseball podcast host.
Generally, over the years, that hasn't mattered as far as Seattle goes and Blue Jays fans packing that place, whether they're great, whether they're terrible.
We miss our neighbors and friends from the north.
About 40 Seattle businesses trying to entice Canadians this weekend.
If you come from Canada with a Canadian driver's license or a passport, or you use that goofily delightful Canadian accent, we'll give you a 30% discount.
Canadians who did make the trip say they're putting politics aside.
I'm coming down to enjoy myself with my son and my friends.
We've been to Toronto a few times, but this is definitely an easier trip for us.
But these fans say they won't be heading south anytime soon.
It just feels like the least we could do. It just feels like important to have like that Canadian unity.
Instead, keeping their money and love for baseball within Canada. Yasmin Ranea, CBC News, Vancouver.
12:20 now. This is BC Today. And we asked you as well on Friday if you were continuing to boycott U.S. travel. Here are your emails. Karen writes from Victoria, the fentanyl issue for Trump was an excuse. He doesn't even have the authority to do this. There was no national emergency. About 1% of fentanyl going into the States is or was from Canada. Sheila writes, I would much prefer to hear that American communities, businesses, and residents are flooding their federal politicians with feedback that their local economies are suffering because there are now so many fewer Canadian travelers. Then and only then should American communities offer enticements such as PAR to Canadian travelers. If they don't speak out to their elected officials, there will be no pressure for change from the top. Sarah writes from Kelowna, if a consumer has a certain amount of money, then we need to choose whether to spend that money in America or in Canada. This situation is certainly hurting both countries, but it is making of American voters who elected Trump as president. My money is staying in Canada. And Sean writes, it's not about boycotting the U.S., it's about feeling safe and welcome when crossing the border. I've had negative experiences when crossing the border as a Canadian entering the U.S. prior to Trump. In the current climate, I'm going to focus my travel within Canada and avoid potentially even more distressing experiences when crossing the border. Thanks so much for all of your emails. You can reach us again. Let us know what you think of anything we do on the show. It's bctoday@cbc.ca. It's 12:23 now. You're with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott. Thank you for joining us. And for the rest of the show, we're going to have a conversation that I know is near and dear to so many people's hearts. And this is about dealing with mental health, in particular for youth. Now, children and teens face pressure from school, friends, social media. Add to that added risks, including intergenerational trauma. And it's all the more important to address the topic. We have a panel of experts here with us joining us for the show, and we're going to take your calls and your questions. How can we better support young people and their mental health? And how do you approach issues around mental health and substance use when talking to your children? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can just hit pound 690. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. And before I introduce my guests, let me just give out some support numbers for you as well. The Kids Help Phone is 1-800-668-6868, and BC's mental health support line is 310-6789. No area code needed. I'll repeat those throughout the show as well. And I'm pleased to welcome my guests here. Joe Adetui is a counselor with Kids Help Phone. He's joining us from Toronto. Dr. Evan Adams is an Indigenous physician and research scholar. Now, he has served as BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer and Chief Medical Officer for the First Nations Health Authority. He's now host of the docuseries The Conversation, which is about families facing substance use issues. And Margaret Flynn is Senior Program Manager of Youth Programs for Coast Mental Health. Welcome to all of you. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello.
Glad to be here.
Very good to have you all. Joe, I'll start with you. You know, at the Kids Help Phone, what are you seeing? How much is demand for counseling when it comes to children and youth? How much has that grown?
I mean, it's it's been incredible, the amount of calls that we get from youth. I got some stats I just pulled up. I mean, since 2020, Kids Help Phone, we've had 22 million interactions. And so, you know, that's an incredible amount of youth calling in and using our tech services, you know, calling about issues, about something that's urgent to them or an immediate need. So, you know, if we weren't there, where does this go? Like 22 million interactions, and hopefully we supported them the best that we can, but there's just the resources beyond in the communities are lacking. So we're kind of like in between, and we get those kids that sometimes don't have any other way to turn to, whether they're isolated or they don't feel connected in whatever ways. And every issue is a different situation. So we're just glad to be there for them. And one stat that comes up that I also pulled out is that we have youth now under the age of 13 who have contacted KHP about suicide has doubled. So, that's an alarming stat that, youth suicide and kids that young, we're getting, because a part of what we do at Kids Helpline, when someone calls in, we do a risk assessment right away, and we ask them, have you had thoughts of suicide recently, and today or in the last 2 weeks, because we want to make sure the youth is safe and okay before we go on to the next thing. So that's a huge concern, and 80% of the youth that we get that call into our service says, I'm telling you this. I've never told anybody else this. So they're telling us things dear to them, things they felt they couldn't tell anybody, their friends, their family. It is an anonymous service. It is a very safe space.
Yeah.
So they're calling and reaching out for the first time about something. So it's a really valuable service, and I'm really feel fortunate to be able to help the youth.
That's a staggering amount of need. Margaret, what are the biggest sources of stress, the biggest sources of anxiety that young people face?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what we see in our programming is lack of community, lack of connection, access to basic needs like food, clinical supports. If you don't grow up in a home where your parents can support access to counseling, to psychologists, how are youth supposed to get these services? Especially if you're struggling with mental illness, living with mental illness, and you aren't working, you're not able to, one, make sure that you can pay for counseling, or two, just even afford rent or food security. So a lot of our youth services or programming at Coast Mental Health, we focus on the community, the connection, and providing basic needs.
And Evan, I mentioned earlier, what about if you have compounding risks like intergenerational trauma? What have you seen and observed is the impact when it comes to youth who are Indigenous?
Yes, we're definitely hearing from our young people that it's a dark and challenging time, and it always is surprising to hear their stories of how they're living. Of course, all young people, including Indigenous young people, live in very different circumstances, one from the other. Whether you live on the coast or you live near a city, if you're in the north, it's all slightly different. But I think they're all saying to us that they're feeling a bit of a generational gap. The older people don't really understand their current realities. And I think how they're growing up compared to, say, how I grew up is very different with the internet and COVID recently. And I think just so much bad news happening around the world that, they're hearing about constantly. I feel like what they're coping with is different than what we coped with when we were growing up.
That's a really good point. And and I would imagine that affects that sense of connection that Margaret was talking about. I have about 15 seconds here before the news update, but Evan, how do you bridge that then? Let's just zero in on the generational gap. If I'm a parent who went through a different kind of childhood, how do I connect with my child over these issues?
Well, I think connection is something that we do as people, and what we have that makes us different from animals is we have a voice. We need to talk to each other, and my father always said, just speak from your heart, to your kids. You'll find a way through. They'll hear you, and if they can't hear you, then make sure there's someone else who can say the things that need saying.
Okay, we're going to talk more about that, how to connect to your kids, how to help them face life's challenges, life's circumstances, and ask you as well, how do you approach issues around mental health, and how do you discuss substance use with your kids, and how can we better support youth mental health? I'd love to hear from you. Our numbers, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. Our email is bctoday@cbc.ca. My guests are Joe Adetuya, a counselor with Kids Cellphone in Toronto. Margaret Flynn is a senior program manager of youth programs for Coast Mental Health. Dr. Evan Adams is an Indigenous physician and research scholar. He hosts a docuseries called The Conversation, and you can watch it at pathways2healing.tv. Again, if you need support, the Kids Cellphone is 1-800-668-6868, and BC's mental health support line is 310-6789. We'll go to your calls and back to our panel coming up in the next half hour, and that's just in a couple of minutes here, right after the CBC News Update with Robert Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. The BC Wildfire Service says crews are working to protect critical infrastructure such as highways from fires that have burned through the winter in the Fort Nelson region. Officials say they are currently focused on 2 fires near Highway 77. The service says fallen trees and debris have been a challenge. Vancouver police say officers have arrested a violent offender who fled a halfway house in Winnipeg about 2 years ago. They say the 30-year-old man was serving a 10-year sentence for crimes including second-degree murder. It's believed the man has been living under a false name in the downtown east side since his disappearance. And the provincial government has committed more than $1 million to 15 schools to fund supervised walks to school for elementary students. It says the program was developed in partnership with the Society for Children and Youth of BC and aims to help kids start their day with fresh air and exercise. And now the forecast. Environment Canada says the Okanagan Connector could see up to 5 centimeters of snow. On the north coast, mainly sunny this afternoon with a high of 14. Highs up to 19 with a mix of sun and cloud in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, some sun and cloud with a high of 18 degrees. Highs to 15 with a chance of showers and thunderstorms in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a risk of thunderstorms with showers and a high of 16. And for Metro Vancouver, Greater Victoria, and the Fraser Valley, some sun and cloud this afternoon with highs from 16 to 19. That's your CBC News Update from Vancouver.
Thank you so much, Rob. That's Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. And thanks for joining us here on BC Today. We are heading into wildfire season now, and Fortis BC has a new plan that involves cutting electricity supply to mitigate the risks. It's proposing to proactively cut power to some customers in the southern interior during extreme heat and wind events. This is an effort to protect critical infrastructure this summer. Now, Fortis says this measure would be a last resort. It's a common practice in California, they say, but Princeton Mayor Spencer Coyne has written an open letter criticizing those plans. He spoke on the early edition this morning.
Start off, we'd have to evacuate probably 1,000 people. We'd have to evacuate both hospitals, the one in Princeton and in Caribbean. We'd have to evacuate our care facilities. We'd have to evacuate anybody with high risk, so anybody who's got diabetes or CPAP and all those type of things, they'd all have to be evacuated.
Is that a worthwhile trade-off if it prevents wildfires?
Well, on the surface, it sounds that way, but, this is nothing new for our area. The fact that we would be a complete dead zone from Princeton all the way down to Costin, I don't think so. It's windy, it's a arid area, but they can't give you the exact when they're going to pull the trigger. They don't have an answer for that, and that's the problem. Like, this was not a consideration of the residents, and we weren't consulted on any of this.
Welcome back to BC Today, and we're talking about youth mental health and taking your calls as well. How can we support young people and their mental well-being? How do you approach issues around mental health and substance use with your children? How do you have that conversation? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can also email bctoday@cbc.ca. We have an email from Pat who writes, I've dealt with a feeling of isolation of my children plus addiction. It seems to have come from bullying in school to social media stigma. Once mental health shows up, then it's hard to get a job and survive in our society. The stigma of being different starts early and becomes a traumatic experience that goes far beyond the teen years. I truly believe social media is one of the biggest problems we have for our youth. Pat, thank you so much for the email. Let me go back to my panel here, and I'm pleased to welcome back our guests here. And again, I'll give out the number for the mental health support line, 310-6789, and the kids helpline is 1-800-668-6868. And my three guests are Margaret Flynn, Senior Program Manager of Youth Programs for Coast Mental Health. Dr. Evan Adams is an Indigenous physician and research scholar who served as BC's Deputy Provincial Health Officer and Chief Medical Officer for the First Nations Health Authority, now hosts the docuseries A Conversation, and as well Joe Adetui, who is a counselor with Kids Help Phone. Joe, I'll start with you. We ended the last half hour with Dr. Adams talking about just, be open with your children, have that conversation. What are the first things? What are the things that parents, what are the questions parents should be asking their children, even at an early age?
Yeah. Well, I think these are all good things that we're talking about. And what I noticed just from my work, and that was a really good email when she talked about, hey, what do I do when it's gone? One of the most important things I think is early intervention, which means is if knowing your child, and if you start seeing different behaviors, if they used to come home and they would sit down and talk to you, or they would have supper with you, and now if they're not even coming home, or if they're coming home and staying in the basement or staying in their room, they're isolating themselves, they're not telling you about their day. Now that's the initial change in behavior. So what's happening there? What's different? So it's and we and sometimes we do that as we think that when they're 5, 6, and 7, they need more attention, they need more supervision, and that's correct. But we somehow feel, okay, now they've got friends, we want to leave them alone and give them their space and not connect with them anymore. And then what happens is that things start to go awry, and we don't pick up on things like, hey, are they depressed maybe? Are they having some issues over here? Is there some substance abuse? Until the parent finds something, or the guardian, whoever, there other things happen at school. Their marks start to get low is usually an indication. So the first thing is if you can stay connected with your child, and it could be like even a 5-minute conversation, or just trying to have supper, or trying to do something where you're together for a few moments, whether it's outside or going for a walk, going for an ice cream, is that bonding, is that connection. Because when I talk to a lot of youth, I say, when did things start to go sideways with your parent? And it was a lot of times is that, well, we used to do a lot of things together. Why don't you do that anymore? Well, they're too busy, I'm too busy. So I think it's a lot easier if you keep that connection with your kids throughout that period of time. And it's not being necessarily a helicopter parent. It's just that giving them that opportunity to say, this is non-judgmental here, because I get a lot of kids that say, well, I don't want to tell my parents that I'm drinking or I'm doing these things. And I go, why? Because they say, well, they're going to ground me. They're going to punish me. They're going to, tell me, how could you do this in our house? So to really, create that bond where you're going to be able to know more about your kids, you'll be able to help them and get them services if they need, and create that supportive environment is by talking to them and being not judgmental and letting them know, hey, if you come to me and you're open, the punishment's off to the side.
Yeah, it's
Let's
safe.
find out what's going on.
It's
exactly.
safe. Yeah. And so,
Yeah, it's
Margaret,
safe.
what, you deal with youth programs. Like, how do you suggest parents keep that connection then, even before there's any sign that anything's gone awry?
Yeah, it's a great question. As parents, we typically want to, if we're talking to our kids and they come to us with a problem, we want to jump in and fix it. What I'd recommend is if parents can stay in a place of connection over correction, that's really important. Stay calm, stay present, breathe. If your kid comes to you and they're dealing with some really heavy things, I would also say to make sure that you're supporting autonomy and you're allowing your kid to have choice and they're included in the discussion. You're not just coming in and giving them a hard line and this is what we have to do. Really important that they have a voice and they can advocate for themselves and talk about it. And I would also say take care of yourself. It's really important that parents show up, or we're able to show up if we take care of ourselves. So do your own work as well, so you can come to your kids in a place of empathy, understanding, and compassion.
Dr. Adams, I note that it stuck out for me in the news update when they were talking about the benefits of kids walking to school. And, I know that there is that connection between physical health and physical activity and mental health. So what are the things that you suggest parents can be doing with their kids to ensure and maintain that connection?
Yeah, so for as much as sometimes it feels like there's lots of bad news around youth mental health, we should always remind young people that there are opportunities for healing, for getting better. Things like being on the land, things like sports, especially team sports where they might connect with others who are like-minded, who are sympathetic, who are ready to listen. I always say that, a basketball coach can be just as important as a master's level psychologist, because young people need inclusion and respect and a shoulder to lean on sometimes. So again, for us as Indigenous people, it's always that, yes, there's opportunity for healing. I think for some young people, whatever the instigating incident, whatever the trauma, whatever their situation, the solution of drugs and alcohol maybe isn't, I'm not being judgmental, but maybe not the best coping mechanism. And in fact, it can create problems of its own, especially this environment where we have fentanyl, that's really quite deadly, and one single usage can, have a really bad outcome. So we always have to remind young people, mental health, substance use, slightly different, not the same. Wherever you're at, let's try and always be in a good place, a better place, a place where we can heal, a place where we can fill our tanks, a place where we feel connection, and that we can make things better. We're not stuck.
Let's take some calls now, asking people, how do you approach this issue when talking to your kids, the issues around mental health, issues around substance use, and how can we better support the mental wellness of young people in our lives? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. Richard is on the line from Surrey. Hi, Richard. Welcome.
Hi.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd like to point out two things. I was 70 when I was finally diagnosed as ADHD, as was my wife. And we have raised two ADHD kids because it's very genetic. And they have had a life of constant conflict because ADHD is just not being organized. It's massively influential on your state of mind. And for me, it was anger level. And there's only one clinic in Vancouver that you can get diagnosed for ADHD. And it will only take people up to age 35, and you have to be a North Vancouver resident. And aside from that, you're stuck with trying to convince your GP that they should look at this. And there's a huge, huge impediment for this to happen. First of all, the drugs that are used are scheduled drugs. They're treated as narcotics. And with the opioid crisis, no doctor wants to prescribe anything that's a scheduled drug. They won't come near it. So there's this huge, huge disincentive to look at anybody with ADHD.
Can I ask you, I'm sorry, Richard, that you went so long without that diagnosis. What has knowing about ADHD, what has that done for your children? Or have you been able to provide some intervention?
I've gotten on the one of the drugs, and from being lightning quick fused, anger, intimidating individual to reasonably calm, helpful, loving, kind dad. It's night and day. And my kids, my younger daughter, having seen the change in me, has taken some of the medication before as well. I mean, we've been on antidepressants, and they had some effect, but the combination of antidepressant and ADHD is miraculous. And it's not just our family. I've talked to many, many people who have had dramatic changes in their life once they have become aware that they are ADHD. Medication is by no means the only answer, but it sure helps.
Richard, I thank you so much for your call. All the best to you and your daughter as well, okay? Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'll go to Dr. Adams on that. He's raising the gap when it comes to diagnosing ADHD. How serious is that gap when it comes to, neurodivergence and being able to treat it?
Yeah, I hope the listeners were heartened by that story. It is really important to get proper access to a diagnostician, like proper access to care, and to get a good diagnosis and then get good treatment. I mean, diagnosis without good treatment that's not right. So it sounds like he's getting somewhere, and it's really unfortunate that it's taken so long. And I would love to be able to report that we're getting better at diagnosing mental health issues or crises. I would love to be able to report that we're getting better at finding good treatments for our patients, clients, customers. But I'm not sure. I think what's really important, though, for anyone out there who's wondering about their mental health is that they keep trying. It's not helpful sometimes to have facile beliefs like doctors are dum-dums or medications are bad, or they're going to drink anyway, so I might as well drink with them. That kind of facile thinking it's not helpful. And I hope that everyone still.
Okay, I think we've lost the audio there.
Keeps reaching for healing and a better way.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
We sure can. Yes. No, we heard your last point
Right.
there in terms of hoping that people do keep reaching out and keep healing.
Great.
I'm going to just say thank you as well to Joe Adatui, who our line is going to be disconnected in a moment, but I really want to thank you for joining us, Joe. Thank you for your points today. Appreciate it.
Yeah, and just a quick for the parents, we do have a text line. You can text 741-741. We know it's very important to include the parents, and so we do have a text line to a counselor, 741-741 text, and you will get a kids help phone support counselor for parents out there. Thank you very much for bringing me on and talking to everybody and getting the kids help phone name out there. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Joe. Joe Adatui is a counselor with the Kids Help Phone. And let's take another call here as we ask for your thoughts on addressing and improving how we address youth mental health. 1-800-825-5950 is our line, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 as well. Randy is on the line from Vancouver. Hi, Randy.
Hi, Michelle. I'm a regular caller on this topic. I've been a family caregiver to my late mom, who suffered throughout her childhood from bipolar illness. It was essentially undiagnosed. And as a young adult, I took care of her. And now that I have a child, I really want this system to change and focus on prevention, which is, I appreciate what your guests are saying, especially the Deputy Medical Health Officer. Sorry, Doctor, I forget your name.
Dr. Adams, yeah.
Dr. Adams, I'm just wondering if you're familiar with the Icelandic model. And it has been shown through the research they've done, and I'm not certain of exactly the statistics, but youth alcohol consumption went way down compared to, I think it was over a 5-year period, compared to the rates in Europe. And the primary reason for that was a prevention model that included family support, community centers, the health system support, and the schools. They were all integrated.
Wow.
So there was this care model preventive network surrounding the kids.
Wow.
And I see that in team sports. I've been a coach in soccer to my child's team, and I see my child playing at soccer teams at a competitive level. The kids are enjoying themselves. The parents are surrounding them, literally and figuratively. And the coaches are involved. And we have healthy kids out there, generally mentally and very healthy physically. And I'm just wondering why our politicians don't look at this. In the long term, it saves money. Society's healthier. But we have this reactionary right now. I'm involved with a committee on the fentanyl crisis and overdose. Why are we getting to that model? We're getting to that crisis because we don't have solid prevention in place.
What a point. What a fascinating point, Randy. Thank you very much. Yes, preventative models are, first of all, I think he was wondering, this Icelandic model. And Dr. Adams, you are focused on research now too. Like, what do we know about models of preventative programs that are working?
Sure. Yeah, public health is where I'm working, and as an Indigenous public health official, it's very clear to us that we're hearing from Indigenous peoples, from clients, that a more holistic approach is more appropriate. You shouldn't be just accessing the care system when you're feeling suicidal and really in a bad way. So yes, prevention is so clearly a framework that we can all be entering in. And young people can learn that drugs and alcohol are really not the answer, whatever the original question was. I'm not sure if politicians are the only leads in health. I would say that it probably needs to include the public health system. It needs to include caregivers, and I think it also needs to include family heads. And like you said, other stakeholders like schools. So if they could be more coordinated, like it sounds like they are in Iceland, which is a much smaller jurisdiction than here in this province, that would be really, really helpful. And again, Indigenous people are saying, yes, let's be more holistic and let's be more upstream than we have been so far.
Margaret, where can parents turn for that kind of, Richard was talking about sports as an example, but where can parents turn for programs that provide that kind of outlet and community, the preventative focus programs?
Yeah, I would say if you have a youth between the ages of 13 and 24, Foundry is a fantastic resource. Our programming complements Foundry in the terms that we provide programming from ages 19 to 30 plus. Most youth services end at around the age of 25. So we're aiming to extend that continuum of care and provide community again and connection and resources for young adults living with mental illness. That's what I would recommend.
Okay, Foundry, we've heard that as well in our conversations with Johnny Morris from CMHA, the Canadian Mental Health Association in BC. Let's take another call here now. David in New Westminster Hi, David. Your thoughts on improving mental health, mental well-being for our youth?
Hi, Michelle. Thank you very much. My story is similar to Richard's in that we were dealing with lots of issues with our kids. The school system, I'm sorry to say, completely was, I'm not going to say failed, because I don't think it had the capacity to actually provide support to my kids or a bunch of other kids that I saw there as well. So we had to advocate for ourselves. Thank goodness we have those resources, both in terms of financial and our community connectiveness and our network, that we were able to get that support for our kids. And they're in their late teens now. I'm quite happy about that. But when we look at, how did we get here? I think your guest from the coast was talking about people not having proper housing, not having proper food. How are they supposed to be looking after their mental health if they don't have a place to sleep, or if they're looking for their next meal? And then all of that gets compounded with addiction. So when we look at what we need to do, we need to look at things like this Icelandic model. We need to do more prevention. That starts with social services to make sure that people, and kids in particular, are not sleeping out in the street. They're not looking for when the next meal is. When they go to school, it's a supportive environment that's able to help all kids, not just the median kids. And then the healthcare system, when people want mental health assistance, we know that it can be quite successful when people are seeking that out. They get it. But this whole idea that's being talked about lately about forcing mental health services on people who don't want it, it's a waste of already scarce resources, and it just makes me so angry. I want to thank you, Michelle, for having the show, and thank your guests for all the work they're doing for the kids. It's so critical. Kids are facing so many challenges these days, and I think society is failing them.
David, thank you so much for the call, talking about the systemic issues, the foundation for health. Really appreciate your call. And I think this is a conversation we're going to have to revisit and do again. If my guest would like to join me once again, I hope that would be something we can do. Dr. Evan Adams and Margaret Flynn, thank you so much for your time. I do hope we speak again on this. It's an important topic.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me, and would love to be back to speak more.
Dr. Evan Adams is a physician and research scholar. He hosts a docuseries called The Conversation. You can watch it on pathwaystohealing.tv. We were joined by Joe Adatui, a counselor with Kids Cellphone, Margaret Flynn, Senior Program Manager of Youth Programs for Coast Mental Health.